I didn't plan to fall for her, but the way her eyes lingered on mine made the rest of the world go quiet. I wasn't looking for anything that day. No romance, no complication. Just another ordinary afternoon unfolding the way it always did. I remember thinking how predictable everything felt, how my life moved in straight, sensible lines. And then she walked in, and something inside me shifted before I could name it. She didn't demand attention. That was the first thing I noticed. No sharp gestures, no raised voice. Just a calm, unhurried presence. Like she had learned long ago that the world would make space for her if she simply moved through it honestly. She stood with relaxed confidence, shoulders easy, head held not high but steady. When she smiled at someone nearby, it was soft, unforced, the kind of smile that suggested she had nothing to prove. I caught myself watching the way she listened, truly listened. Her eyes stayed focused, warm and intent, not drifting the way most people's do when they're half thinking about something else. There was depth there, experience maybe, and a quiet kindness that made me straighten unconsciously, like I wanted to be more thoughtful just by being in her presence. Then, unexpectedly, her gaze met mine. It wasn't dramatic. No spark, no obvious signal. Just a moment too long to be accidental. Her eyes didn't rush away when they found me. They rested there, curious, measuring, as if she were seeing not just who I was, but who I might become. My chest tightened, not with nerves exactly, but with awareness. The room felt suddenly smaller, the background sounds duller, as though someone had turned the volume down on everything else. When she spoke to me for the first time, her voice surprised me. It was calm and low, carrying a warmth that felt personal even though her words were casual. Standing close enough to talk, I noticed the faint scent of her perfume. Nothing sweet or overpowering, just clean and comforting, like linen warmed by sunlight. It stayed with me even after she stepped back. There was a brief, almost accidental touch when she handed something to me, her fingers brushing the side of my hand. It lasted less than a second, but I felt it clearly. Not because it was bold, but because it was gentle, intentional without being suggestive. My pulse quickened in a way that didn't make sense for such a small moment. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into an ordinary interaction. But as the minutes passed, I kept noticing her. How she tucked her hair behind her ear when she thought. How her posture softened when she laughed quietly at something someone said. Each detail settled into me, leaving behind a faint, persistent restlessness. By the time she looked at me again, another brief glance, another shared pause, I realized something had already changed. I couldn't explain it yet. I only knew that her presence had disturbed the calm order of my thoughts, and that even after she moved out of my sight, I carried the feeling with me. After that first meeting, I started noticing how easily our paths crossed. Not in an obvious, deliberate way, just enough to feel natural, as if the day itself were quietly arranging small chances for us to talk. At first, our conversations stayed light. Simple questions, polite exchanges. But even then, there was a steadiness to her attention that made every word feel more deliberate than usual. She listened the way people rarely do anymore. When I spoke, she didn't interrupt or rush to respond. Her eyes stayed on mine, patient and open, and I found myself slowing down without meaning to, choosing my words more carefully. It felt strangely comforting, like being given permission to be fully present. When she smiled in response, it wasn't wide or dramatic, just a soft curve of her lips that reached her eyes and stayed there a moment longer than necessary. As the conversations deepened, so did the silences between them. They weren't awkward, they felt earned. We would pause, letting a thought settle, and instead of filling the space, she allowed it to exist. I became aware of how she angled her body toward me when we talked, one shoulder subtly closer, as if she were quietly closing the distance without making it obvious. There was a moment I couldn't stop replaying later. I had said something offhand, nothing important, just a small frustration I hadn't meant to share. She reached out as she responded, her hand resting briefly on my forearm. The contact was light, warm, grounding. I felt it through the fabric of my sleeve, a steady reassurance rather than a spark. She withdrew just as calmly, continuing the conversation as if nothing unusual had happened. But my attention lingered where her hand had been. She began sharing pieces of herself, too. Not confessions, just honest reflections shaped by time. The way she spoke about life carried a quiet weight, as though she had learned what mattered by letting go of what didn't. There was a softness beneath her confidence, something thoughtful and slightly guarded. When she laughed, it was gentle and genuine, and I noticed how her shoulders relaxed afterward, as if she rarely let herself do that. I realized I was looking forward to seeing her, not in a restless way, but with a calm anticipation that surprised me. When she entered the room, my awareness sharpened. When she wasn't there, something felt unfinished. I caught myself remembering the sound of her voice, the steady rhythm of it, the way it seemed to slow my thoughts instead of stirring them up. At one point, our conversation drifted into something more personal: hopes, choices, the quiet ways people carry their past. She didn't offer advice. She didn't correct me. She simply listened, nodding slowly, her gaze never leaving mine. I felt seen in a way I hadn't expected, and it unsettled me more than any flirtation would have. By the end of that day, I understood something I hadn't before. Whatever was growing between us wasn't built on attraction alone. It was shaped in these small moments, shared pauses, gentle touches, unhurried words, that stayed with me long after we parted. It didn't take long before awareness crept in. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Not just of her, but of us. Of how our conversations looked from the outside. Of how easily warmth could be misunderstood. How closeness could invite assumptions neither of us had spoken aloud. I began to notice the small shifts in the room when we sat together. The way conversations around us softened or slowed. How a glance would linger a second too long before looking away. No one said anything, but the silence carried its own questions. I wondered if she felt it too, that invisible pressure forming around moments that had once felt simple. She must have, because I saw her adjusting subtly, carefully, choosing a seat with just enough space between us, folding her hands in her lap instead of letting them rest freely. When our arms brushed by accident, she would still, just for a heartbeat, before moving away as if reminding herself of something important. It wasn't rejection. It was restraint. And somehow that made the tension sharper, not softer. I struggled with my own thoughts. I respected her deeply, her clarity, her steadiness, the quiet dignity she carried. The last thing I wanted was to misread her kindness as something it wasn't. Yet there were moments that unsettled me. The way her eyes searched my face when I spoke, the thoughtful pauses before she answered, the softness that returned when we shared a private smile. Those weren't imagined. I knew that much. One afternoon we sat side by side, closer than before. Not touching, but aware of the narrow space between us. Our knees were almost aligned, separated by only air and hesitation. I could feel her warmth without contact, a gentle presence that made me acutely aware of my own breathing. I kept my hands still, resting them where they were, afraid that even the smallest movement might say something I wasn't ready to voice. She spoke about something ordinary, but her voice seemed quieter, more measured. When she laughed softly, she glanced at me, then away, as if checking herself. I caught that look, the one that suggested she was aware of the same unspoken current, choosing not to name it. Inside, I wrestled with uncertainty. Was this something mutual, or simply the closeness of two people who felt safe with each other? Was I projecting my own feelings onto her kindness? I told myself to slow down, to be careful, that whatever this was, it deserved patience and respect, not impulse. There was a moment when our eyes met again, longer this time. No smile, no words, just recognition. I saw hesitation there, but also something softer, consideration, maybe. She didn't look away immediately. Neither did I. The world around us seemed to hold its breath. Then she shifted slightly, creating a fraction more distance, and the moment passed. Nothing had happened, and yet, everything felt different. I understood then that we were standing near a line neither of us had drawn, but both of us could see. A line shaped by circumstance, by perception, by the weight of what could be lost as easily as it could be gained. And as I sat there, feeling the echo of her presence beside me, I knew one thing with quiet certainty. The evening felt different from the start, quieter, as if the world had decided to lower its voice so we could hear what mattered. The light around us was warm and dimming, softening the edges of everything it touched. We weren't alone, not completely, but we were removed enough to feel protected by the moment, held in a space that asked for honesty. She was calmer than usual, yet there was a tension beneath it, something careful in the way she folded her hands together and then released them again. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but slower, as if each word had been chosen with intention. "There are things I don't say easily," she admitted, not looking at me at first. Her gaze was fixed somewhere ahead, thoughtful, distant. "Not because I don't feel them, but because I've learned what words can complicate." I didn't interrupt. I shifted slightly closer, not enough to touch, just enough to show I was there. She noticed. Her shoulders eased, almost imperceptibly. She talked about expectations, the quiet weight of being seen a certain way, of having to remain composed even when uncertainty settled in. About how people assume confidence means certainty, when often it's just practice. As she spoke, I heard vulnerability woven carefully into every sentence, like something precious she was unwrapping slowly, afraid it might unravel if rushed. When she finally turned to look at me, her eyes were open and honest. "I don't want to misunderstand kindness," she said softly, "and I don't want to cause confusion where there doesn't need to be any." Her words landed gently, but they carried weight. I felt the urge to reassure her, to reach out. But instead I spoke, carefully, truthfully. "I don't feel confused," I said, "but I'm not trying to rush anything either." My voice surprised me with its calm. "I just value this, whatever it is." For a moment, she studied my face, searching for something. Then she exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding for a long time. She leaned back slightly, her shoulder brushing mine, just barely. The contact was accidental or maybe intentional in the quietest way. She didn't move away. As the silence settled, she tilted her head and rested it lightly against my shoulder. The weight was gentle, trusting. I felt it immediately, the warmth of her, the softness of her hair against my neck. My body stilled, not wanting to disturb the fragile peace of the moment. My breath slowed to match hers. We stayed like that, saying nothing. The closeness wasn't charged with urgency. It was calm, intimate in a way that felt deeper than touch alone. I was aware of her presence in every sense, the rise and fall of her breathing, the quiet steadiness of her being there with me. "I'm glad you're patient," she murmured after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. "So am I," I replied. There was no declaration, no crossing of boundaries, just two people allowing honesty to exist between them, unguarded for a moment. And as she lifted her head and met my eyes again, I understood that something important had been shared. It happened without ceremony, without the kind of moment people later describe as obvious or dramatic. In fact, if someone had been watching us from a distance, they might not have noticed anything at all. But for me, it was the moment everything shifted from possibility into truth. We were standing close, talking quietly about something unimportant. The air between us felt settled, calm, as if the tension that once hovered had softened into something steadier. She paused mid-sentence, her eyes dropping briefly to my hands, then lifting back to my face. There was a question there, not spoken, but clear enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't rush. I didn't reach out impulsively. Instead, I let my hand move slowly, deliberately, stopping just short of hers, giving her time, space, choice. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then she turned her palms slightly upward, a small motion that felt louder than words. I closed the distance gently, my fingers resting against hers before settling fully into her hand. Her skin was warm, softer than I expected, and when her fingers curled around mine, it wasn't tentative. It was sure, calm, as if she had already made peace with what this meant. The contact sent a quiet warmth through me. Not a rush, not a spark, but something deeper, grounding, like a confirmation rather than a surprise. I felt my shoulders relax, my breathing slow, as though my body understood before my mind could catch up. She didn't look away. Our eyes met, and in that stillness, I saw it clearly. Not uncertainty, not fear, but acceptance. A shared understanding that this touch wasn't accidental, and it wasn't casual. It carried intention, and care, and restraint all at once. Neither of us squeezed or shifted. We simply held hands, letting the moment exist exactly as it was. I became aware of how her thumb rested lightly against my knuckle, unmoving, yet present. How close she stood now, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her arm beside mine. "I just needed to know," she said softly, her voice steady but quiet. "That you weren't alone in it?" I asked. She nodded once. "That I wasn't imagining it." I felt a small, almost involuntary smile touch my lips. "You weren't." She exhaled, a slow breath that seemed to release something she'd been carrying for a while. Her grip tightened just slightly, not enough to pull me closer, just enough to stay connected. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. The world around us continued as it always did, but I felt separate from it now, anchored in this simple, powerful gesture. A touch that didn't demand anything beyond honesty. When she finally let go, her fingers lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. The absence of her hand felt just as meaningful as its presence had been. She met my eyes once more, her expression softer now, more open. After that moment, nothing felt secret, but nothing felt simple either. The clarity we had found in each other's presence didn't erase the world around us. If anything, it made us more aware of it, of expectations, of glances, of the quiet opinions that never needed to be spoken to be felt. We didn't rush into anything. If there was one thing we both seemed to understand instinctively, it was that care mattered more than speed. Our conversations continued, but they carried a new steadiness now. Less circling, less hesitation. When we looked at each other, there was recognition, an understanding that we had acknowledged something real and chosen not to ignore it. One afternoon, she spoke it aloud. "I don't want this to feel like we're hiding," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "And I don't want it to feel like we're proving anything either." I appreciated that about her, the way she named things without dramatizing them. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I don't want to rush you," I said, "or make this harder than it needs to be." She studied my face, then smiled softly. "That's why I trust you." That word settled into me quietly. Trust felt heavier than affection, and far more meaningful. There were moments when the outside noise crept in anyway. Pause before she reached for me. A thoughtful silence after someone walked by. But instead of pulling us apart, those moments became chances to check in with each other, with ourselves. When she set a boundary, I respected it without question. When I hesitated, she noticed and gave me space. Nothing felt forced. Nothing felt taken. One evening, as the light faded around us, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around my waist. The hug was slow, intentional. Her cheek rested against my chest, just beneath my collarbone. I could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing, calm and unhurried. Instinctively, I placed my hands at her back. Not pulling her in, just holding her there, present. The simplicity of it surprised me. No urgency, no tension, just warmth and closeness and the quiet assurance that we were choosing this moment together. "This feels safe," she murmured. "It does," I agreed. As we pulled apart, she kept one hand resting lightly against my side, as if grounding herself before letting go. When she finally stepped back, she didn't retreat emotionally. If anything, she seemed more certain. Her posture relaxed, her gaze open. I realized then that what we were building wasn't about defying expectations or leaning into fantasy. It was about intention. About two people deciding carefully and honestly to show up for each other in a way that made sense to them. I had imagined connection as something overwhelming, something that swept you off your feet. But with her, it was different. It was steady, considered, chosen. Time did what it always does when something is real. It softened the edges and revealed the shape underneath. What once felt delicate grew steady, not through grand gestures, but through repetition, through showing up, through choosing each other in small, consistent ways that didn't need to be announced. Our connection settled into something warm and intentional. We learned each other's rhythms, the quiet mornings when words weren't necessary, the evenings when conversation flowed easily. Sometimes we sat close without touching, just sharing the same space. Other times our hands found each other naturally, fingers brushing, then staying. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt uncertain. I noticed how comfortable she had become in my presence. The guarded pauses disappeared. She laughed more freely now, her shoulders loosening as if she no longer felt the need to hold herself so carefully. When she spoke, there was ease in her voice, and when she listened, she leaned in without hesitation. One afternoon, we walked side by side, close enough that our arms brushed with every step. First, it was accidental, then deliberate. Her hand drifted toward mine, her fingers grazing my knuckles in a quiet question. I turned my palm slightly, just as I had before, and this time there was no pause. She slipped her hand into mine, her grip easy and familiar. I felt it then, not excitement, not nerves, but peace. She looked up at me, her eyes catching the light, and smiled in a way that felt deeply personal. Not a smile meant for the world, just for me. I realized how much that meant, how rare it was to be chosen so simply, without performance or expectation. Later, as we sat together, she rested her head against my shoulder again, just as she had that first evening. The gesture felt different now, not tentative, not exploratory. It was home-like. I tilted my head slightly toward hers, the side of my face brushing her hair, and we stayed that way, letting the moment stretch. "You know," she said quietly, "I didn't expect this." "Neither did I replied. She smiled at that, thoughtful. "But I'm glad we didn't ignore it." So was I. Looking back, it wasn't her beauty that stayed with me most, though she was undeniably graceful. It was the way she made me feel grounded, seen, chosen. Her soft touch didn't overwhelm me. It anchored me. Her captivating eyes didn't distract me. They steadied me. What we found wasn't a fantasy or a fleeting attraction. It was a connection shaped by patience, respect, and quiet courage. Something we stepped into willingly, with open eyes and steady hearts. As the day faded and we rose to leave, she squeezed my hand once, gentle, reassuring, and didn't let go until the very last moment. And as we walked forward together, I understood something with calm certainty. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt a connection grow quietly, unexpectedly, take a moment to like this video. It helps stories like this reach the people who might need them. And if you enjoy slow burn, emotionally honest romances like this one, consider subscribing. There are many more stories waiting to be told. Thank you for listening.